Have you ever felt the ground crumble beneath you in a room full of people who were supposed to be your friends? That is exactly what happened to Sarah Jenkins on the night of her 5th wedding anniversary. One moment, she was the devoted wife of Seattle's most arrogant tech mogul. The next, she was being physically shoved out the door while the city's elite laughed. But her husband, David, made one fatal calculation that night. He forgot that quiet women often hold the loudest secrets. And Sarah's secret, he was about to walk through the front door. The air inside the Fairmont estate smelled of expensive perfume, stale ambition, and the crisp ozone of a looming thunderstorm. It was the 5th wedding anniversary of David and Sarah Jenkins, a night that was supposed to be a celebration of love, but felt more like a coronation for David. David Jenkins was the CEO of Jenkins Tech, a company that had skyrocketed in value over the last 3 years. He was handsome in a way that felt manufactured, teeth too white, suit too sharp, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He moved through the crowd of Seattle's elite like a shark in a koi pond, shaking hands with investors and laughing loudly at jokes that weren't funny. In his shadow stood Sarah, unlike the other women in the room, who were draped in sequins and diamonds that caught the chandelier light. Sarah wore a simple, elegant navy dress. It was vintage, understated, and to the keen observer, timeless. But in this room, timeless was just a polite word for invisible. "Adjust your posture, Sarah," a sharp voice hissed from behind her. Sarah stiffened. It was Catherine, David's mother. Catherine was a woman who wore her wealth like armor. She held a flute of champagne as if it were a weapon, her eyes scanning Sarah's outfit with undisguised disdain. "You look like a librarian who got lost on her way to a book club," Catherine sneered, taking a sip. "David is closing the biggest deal of his life tonight with the Sterling Group. The least you could do is look the part of a billionaire's wife. That dress, is that the same one you wore to the charity gala 3 years ago?" "It's David's favorite color, Catherine," Sarah replied softly, her voice steady despite the sting. "And I'm his wife, not a mannequin." Catherine laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Oh, honey, in this world, there is no difference. Look at him." Sarah looked. Across the room, David was deep in conversation with Jonathan Price, a venture capitalist they needed to impress. But David wasn't alone. Standing almost uncomfortably close to him was Jessica Vane. Jessica was the vice president of marketing at Jenkins Tech. She was everything Sarah was not, loud, aggressive, and draped in a crimson gown that left very little to the imagination. She had her hand on David's forearm, laughing theatrically, whispering something into his ear that made David smirk. Sarah felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She had prepared a gift for David, a rare vintage Patek Philippe watch from the 1950s. She had saved for 2 years, using the small allowance David gave her and the interest from her own modest savings, to buy it. It was in her clutch, heavy and cold. She wanted to give it to him before the speeches began. She began to weave through the crowd. "Excuse me. Pardon me," she murmured. When she finally reached David's circle, the conversation halted. David turned, his smile fading instantly when he saw her. The annoyance in his eyes was fleeting, but sharp enough to cut. "Sarah," David said, his tone flat. "I'm in the middle of a discussion with Jonathan." "I know, David," she said, trying to keep her voice light. I wanted to give you this, before the speeches. Happy anniversary." She pulled the small velvet box from her clutch. Jessica Vane let out a small, condescending giggle. "Oh, how quaint. A little trinket? David, maybe we should open the real gifts later. You know, the ones that actually match the valuation of the company?" The men in the circle chuckled nervously. David didn't defend her. He didn't tell Jessica to stop. Instead, he sighed, taking the box without looking at it, and shoving it into his pocket. "Thanks, Sarah. We'll talk later. Why don't you go find my mother? She needs help with the seating arrangements." "But David," Sarah pressed, her heart sinking. "I haven't seen you all week. I thought tonight—" "Tonight is about business, Sarah," David snapped, his voice rising just enough to draw the attention of the nearby guests. "God, can you just stop being so needy for 1 hour? Look around you. Everyone here is a titan of industry. You're just in the way." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She looked at Jessica, who was smirking triumphantly. "I'm your wife, David," Sarah whispered. "Then start acting like an asset, not a liability," David hissed. Sarah turned on her heel, fighting back tears. She walked toward the balcony doors, needing air. As she stepped out into the cool night, the rain had just begun to fall, a light drizzle that promised a storm. She didn't know that the storm wasn't coming from the sky. It was already pulling up to the front gate. 20 minutes later, the grand ballroom was called to attention. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight hit the center stage. David Jenkins walked up to the microphone, looking every bit the master of the universe. The applause was rapturous. Sarah stood near the back, near the kitchen doors, trying to make herself small. She had dried her eyes and fixed her makeup, determined to support him one last time. "Thank you, everyone," David boomed, his charisma turned up to full volume. "5 years ago, I started this company in a garage. Today, we are on the verge of a partnership that will change the global tech landscape." Cheers erupted. Catherine clapped loudest of all. "But," David continued, his voice dropping to a somber, serious tone, "growth requires change. Sometimes, to fly higher, you have to cut the dead weight that anchors you to the ground." The room went quiet. Sarah frowned. This wasn't the anniversary speech he had rehearsed. David looked directly at Sarah in the back of the room. The spotlight swung around, blinding her. "Sarah," David said, his voice amplified through the speakers, "we've had 5 years. But let's be honest. You don't belong in this world. You never did." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sarah froze, her hand flying to her mouth. "I need a partner who understands power," David continued, pacing the stage. "Someone who pushes me, not someone who sits at home waiting for me to pay the bills. Someone like Jessica." He gestured to the front row. Jessica Vane stood up, beaming, and walked onto the stage. David put his arm around her waist. "So," David announced, "I think it's fitting that on our anniversary, I give myself the gift of freedom. Sarah, I want a divorce, and I want you to leave. Now." The cruelty of it was absolute. He wasn't just breaking up with her. He was destroying her socially. He was performing her humiliation for an audience. "David, please," Sarah said, her voice trembling but audible in the silent room. "Don't do this here." "Security," David barked. 2 burly guards in black suits stepped out from the shadows. They weren't the regular house staff. They were private contractors David had hired for the night. "Escort Miss Jenkins off the premises," David commanded. "She's trespassing." "David!" Sarah cried out as one of the guards grabbed her upper arm. His grip was bruising. "Get your hands off her!" a guest shouted. It was Mrs. Higgins, an elderly neighbor who had always liked Sarah. But Catherine Jenkins stepped in front of her. "Sit down, Martha," Catherine snapped. "This is family business." The guards dragged Sarah toward the main double doors. She stumbled, her high heel catching on the rug, and she fell to her knees. A ripple of laughter came from Jessica's friends near the stage. Sarah looked up. She saw David watching her with cold indifference. She saw the guests, people she had hosted, people she had cooked for, averting their eyes or filming with their phones. She stood up. She shook off the guard's hand. "I can walk," she said, her voice suddenly devoid of emotion. She smoothed her dress. She looked at David one last time. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just a profound, terrifying pity. "You have no idea what you've just done, David," she said quietly. "I've just upgraded," David sneered. "Get out." Sarah turned and walked through the massive oak doors. The guards followed her to ensure she left. They pushed her out onto the front steps. The rain was pouring now. It was a deluge. Sarah stood on the driveway, shivering. No coat, no car, humiliatingly cast aside. Inside, the music started up again. Celebration by Kool and the Gang. The ultimate insult. Sarah hugged her arms around herself, looking down the long, dark driveway. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small, burner flip phone. Not the smartphone David monitored. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 7 years. It rang once. "Hello?" A deep, gravelly voice answered. "Grandfather," Sarah said, her voice breaking for the first time. "I'm ready to come home." There was a pause on the other end, a pause heavy with the weight of billions. "Where are you, Starling?" the voice asked. "The Fairmont estate. He threw me out, Grandfather, in front of everyone." The sound on the other line changed. It wasn't sadness. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. "Dry your eyes, my dear," the voice said, cold as ice and hard as steel. "Look down the road." Sarah looked. Turning the corner of the winding estate driveway, cutting through the rain, were headlights. Not one pair. 2, 4, 6. A convoy of 6 blacked-out Cadillac Escalades and a central Rolls-Royce Phantom was tearing up the driveway, ignoring the speed limit, creating a wall of light. They screeched to a halt in front of Sarah, boxing her in, shielding her from the rain. The doors of the SUVs flew open. 12 men stepped out. They weren't rent-a-cops like David's security. These men wore earpieces, tactical suits under trench coats, and moved with military precision. They snapped umbrellas open, forming a dry canopy over Sarah instantly. Then, the rear door of the Rolls-Royce opened. A silver cane hit the pavement first. Then, a polished black shoe. Silas Sterling emerged. He was 80 years old, but he looked like a king who had just declared war. He was the man who owned the steel mills that built the city, the shipping lines that fed it, and the venture capital firm that David Jenkins had been desperate to woo for months. He walked up to Sarah, ignoring the rain soaking his cashmere coat. He took her face in his hands. "Did they hurt you?" he asked. "Only my pride," Sarah whispered. Silas turned his eyes towards the house. The music was still thumping. The party was still going. "Frederick," Silas said to the man beside him, his personal assistant and fixer for 40 years. "Yes, sir," Frederick replied, already holding a tablet. "Buy it," Silas said. "The company, sir." "The company. The house. The land it sits on. The bank that holds his mortgage. Buy it all. Tonight." "Consider it done, sir." Silas offered Sarah his arm. "Come, Starling. We have a party to crash. I believe I have an investment to withdraw." Sarah took his arm. The tears were gone. She wasn't Sarah Jenkins anymore. She was Sarah Sterling, sole heiress to the Sterling Empire. And the wolf was at the door, the heavy oak doors of the Fairmont estate, which had just been slammed shut to seal Sarah's humiliation, now stood as the only barrier between David Jenkins's fragile ego and a force of nature he was entirely unprepared for. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere had returned to a manicured normalcy. The DJ, sensing the tension, had transitioned from the celebratory celebration to a smooth, non-confrontational jazz track. Waiters swept through the room with practiced invisibility, topping off champagne flutes and whisking away the microscopic evidence of awkwardness. David stood center stage, one hand resting possessively on the small of Jessica's back, the other gripping a microphone. He was high on adrenaline. He had done it. He had shed the dead weight. He felt lighter, faster, richer. "Ladies and gentlemen," David purred, his confidence rebounding, "I apologize for the earlier disruption. Emotional instability is a difficult thing to manage, and I have tried my best for years. But tonight is about the future. It's about Jenkins Tech partnering with the Sterling Group to usher in a new era." He raised his glass toward Jonathan Price, the representative from the Sterling Group, who was standing near the front. Jonathan, however, wasn't raising his glass. He was looking at his phone, his brow furrowed in confusion. He tapped the screen, refreshed it, and looked up at David with an expression that wasn't admiration. It was bewilderment. "David," Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the amplified jazz, "you might want to check the stock ticker." "Not now, John," David laughed dismissively. "We're celebrating." "No," Jonathan said, louder this time. "You really—" Boom! The sound wasn't thunder. It was the double doors of the ballroom being thrown open with such force that the hinges screamed in protest. The heavy wood slammed against the interior walls, cracking the plaster. A gust of wind and rain swept into the warm room, carrying with it the scent of wet asphalt and impending doom. The music cut out instantly. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a phalanx of men. They were soaked, their black trench coats dripping onto the parquet floor, but they stood with the immobility of statues. They formed a V formation, a human spear tip aimed directly at the stage, and at the center of the V, flanked by the largest of the bodyguards, was Sarah. She was no longer the cowering wife who had been dragged out minutes ago. She stood tall, her chin raised, her eyes dry and burning with a cold fire. On her arm was an elderly man who radiated a terrifying kind of authority. Silas Sterling leaned on his silver cane, his eyes scanning the room like a predator assessing a herd of slow-moving gazelles. David squinted against the stage lights. "Security!" he yelled, his voice cracking slightly. "I said get her out of here. And who the hell is this old man?" The two private security guards David had hired, the ones who had bruised Sarah's arms, stepped forward aggressively. "Sir, you need to leave," the lead guard barked, reaching for Silas's lapel. "This is a private—" He never finished the sentence. One of the men from Silas's entourage, a man named Caney, who moved with a blurring speed, intercepted the guard's hand. With a motion that looked almost gentle, Caney twisted the guard's wrist and swept his leg. The guard hit the floor with a sickening thud, groaning as he clutched a dislocated shoulder. The second guard froze, his hand halfway to his belt. Caney simply looked at him, a flat, dead-eyed stare, and shook his head once. The guard raised his hands and backed away, disappearing into the crowd. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. "You have terrible taste in hired help, David," Silas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it projected to the back of the room without a microphone. It was a voice used to commanding boardrooms and silencing unions. David stepped down from the stage, his face flushing red with anger. Jessica trailed behind him, looking more annoyed than afraid. "Who do you think you are?" David demanded, marching toward them. "Breaking into my house? Assaulting my staff? I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you have." Silas laughed. It was a dark, rumbling sound. "Everything I have? You don't have enough zeros in your bank account to pay for the legal fees it would take to sue me for a parking ticket, boy." David stopped 10 feet away. He looked at Sarah, disgust curling his lip. "And you. You really are pathetic, Sarah. You couldn't handle the rejection, so you went and found some Some sugar daddy to come and fight your battles? I knew you were a gold digger, but this is a new low even for you. Jessica chimed in, crossing her arms. It's actually sad. Really, Sarah. Just leave. You're embarrassing yourself. Sarah stepped forward. She didn't look at Jessica. She looked straight at David. I didn't find a sugar daddy, David, Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. I called my family. Family? David scoffed. Your parents are dead. You told me you were alone. You told me you came from nothing. I told you I wanted to build a life on my own terms, Sarah corrected. I told you I didn't want my name to define me. I wanted you to love me for me, not for what I could buy you. And thank God I found out the truth, David sneered, that you're a liar and a nobody. David! The shout came from Jonathan Price. The Sterling Group executive pushed his way through the stunned crowd, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He didn't look at David. He was looking at Silas Sterling with an expression of pure terror. Jonathan rushed past David and practically threw himself in front of Silas, bowing his head in a display of deference that shocked the room. "Mr. Sterling," Jonathan stammered, his voice shaking. "Sir, I had no idea you were in Seattle. If I had known, I would have sent the company jet. I would have—" "Quiet, Price," Silas said, not even looking at him. David froze. The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. "Sterling?" David whispered. He looked at Jonathan. "John, what are you doing? Why are you apologizing to this intruder?" Jonathan turned to David, his eyes wide with panic. "David, shut up! For the love of God, shut up! Do you know who this is?" Jonathan gestured to the old man. "This is Silas Sterling, the founder and chairman of the Sterling Group, the man we are trying to sign the partnership with, the man whose capital fund just authorized the liquidity injection for your company." David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Silas. He looked at the cane, the coat, the entourage. Then, slowly, painfully, his eyes slid to Sarah. Sarah Sterling. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. "And," Silas continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "I am also the grandfather of the woman you just threw into the mud." Silas took a step forward, the tip of his cane striking the marble floor with a sharp clack. "You threw my granddaughter out like garbage, Mr. Jenkins. Now, I'm going to show you what happens when you mess with the Sterling bloodline. I hope you enjoyed your party, because it was your retirement party." The ballroom was a tableau of shock. The guests, Seattle's supposed elite, were frozen. They were witnessing a social nuclear detonation. Phones were raised, recording every second. The live stream count was likely climbing into the millions. David Jenkins, the man who had been a king 5 minutes ago, was now trembling. He tried to salvage the situation. His narcissism wouldn't let him accept defeat so easily. "Mr. Sterling," David stammered, putting on his best salesman smile, though it looked gruesome on his pale face. "Sir, surely there is a misunderstanding." "Sarah never told me. This is a domestic dispute. It shouldn't affect business. The Sterling Group needs Jenkins Tech. We have the best AI algorithm in the market. You can't let a personal squabble derail a billion-dollar merger." Silas looked at David with the curiosity of a scientist examining a bug under a microscope. "A personal squabble?" Silas repeated. "You humiliated her publicly. You questioned her worth. You called her a liability." "It was heat of the moment," David insisted. "Jessica and we are the future of this company. Sarah was just... she didn't fit the brand." "The brand," Silas mused. He turned to Frederick, his assistant. "Frederick, what is the current status of the brand?" Frederick tapped his tablet, his face illuminated by the cool blue light of the screen. "Well, sir," Frederick announced, his voice projecting clearly. "3 minutes ago, per your instruction, the Sterling Group withdrew its offer of partnership. The press release just went live." A collective gasp went through the room. "What?" David shrieked. "You can't do that. We have a verbal agreement." "Read the fine print, David," Jonathan Price whispered, backing away from him. "It's contingent on final board approval." "Which is him." He pointed at Silas. Frederick continued, ignoring David's outburst. "Following the news of the withdrawal, Jenkins' tech stock has triggered a volatility halt. It dropped 40% in pre-market trading in Asia. However, that is the least of your problems." "What could be worse than that?" Jessica screamed. She grabbed David's arm. "David, fix this! My stock options!" Frederick adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Jenkins, you leveraged your personal equity in the company to secure the loan for this estate, correct? The Fairmont estate?" David sweated profusely. "That's standard practice. I needed the capital to expand." "Yes," Silas interjected, "and that loan was held by First City Bank." "So what?" David snapped. "I pay the mortgage." "You did," Silas corrected. "Until 10 minutes ago. I bought the debt. First City Bank was happy to offload a high-risk loan to Sterling Private Holdings." Silas took a step closer to David. The old man was 80, but he loomed over the 30-year-old tech mogul. "I am calling in the loan, David. In full. Immediately." "You can't," David wheezed. "I don't have $50 million liquid. It's all tied up in stock, and the stock is crashing." "Then you are in default," Silas said simply, "which means this house now belongs to me, and by extension, to my granddaughter." Silas turned to the room, addressing the stunned guests. "This is no longer the residence of David Jenkins. This is now the property of the Sterling family. Anyone who wishes to remain guests of Mr. Jenkins may join him on the curb. Anyone who wishes to remain in the good graces of the Sterling Group, and I know many of you have financing through my firms, will finish their champagne and offer their apologies to my granddaughter." The room moved instantly. It was a stampede of loyalty, shifting in real time. Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor, was the first. She walked up to Sarah and hugged her. "I always knew you were too good for him, dear." Then came the business partners, the investors, the people who had laughed at David's jokes. They lined up, ignoring David and Jessica completely, waiting to shake Sarah's hand. "Sarah, so sorry about the confusion. Sarah, you look stunning tonight. Sarah, we must do lunch." Sarah shook their hands, her face impassive. She saw them for what they were, leaves blowing in the wind. David stood alone in the center of the circle, Jessica clutching his arm so hard her nails dug into his suit. He watched his empire evaporate in under 6 minutes. "This isn't fair!" Jessica suddenly shouted, stepping out from behind David. She pointed a manicured finger at Sarah. "You tricked him! You lied by omission! That's fraud! David, tell them! She's the villain here!" Sarah finally looked at Jessica. She walked over to her, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Sarah stopped inches from Jessica. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the small velvet box, the anniversary gift David had shoved into his pocket and then discarded on a table when he went to the stage. Sarah had picked it up on her way back in. "I didn't trick anyone, Jessica," Sarah said softly. "I just wanted to be sure." She opened the box. Inside sat the vintage Patek Philippe. It was understated, scratched with history and priceless to collectors. "I bought this with my own money," Sarah said, "from selling the paintings I made. I didn't use a cent of my grandfather's fortune. I wanted to give David something real, something that takes time to build and care to maintain." She snapped the box shut. "But you two don't want what's real. You want what shines. so you can have each other. You deserve each other." Sarah turned to Frederick. "Frederick, please have security escort the trespassers off my property." "With pleasure, Ms. Sterling," Frederick replied. He signaled to the 12 bodyguards. They stepped forward. "David Jenkins, Jessica Vane," the head guard, Caney, announced. "You are trespassing on private property. You have 60 seconds to vacate the premises before we physically remove you." "My clothes!" David yelled, panic setting in. "My servers, my laptop." "Everything inside the house is seized as collateral against the defaulted loan," Silas said coldly. "You leave with what is on your back, just as you made Sarah do." "David, do something!" Jessica shrieked. David looked around. There was no help coming. The people who had cheered for his speech were now averting their eyes, sipping sterling champagne. David looked at Sarah one last time. "Sarah, baby, please, we can talk about this. I was stressed. The merger, the pressure. You know I love you." The room went deadly silent at the audacity of the lie. Sarah looked at him with a mixture of sadness and finality. "You loved the idea of owning me, David. But you never actually saw me. Goodbye." She turned her back on him. Caney grabbed David by the collar of his expensive suit. Another guard grabbed Jessica. They didn't drag them. They marched them. David shouted, struggling, but he was powerless against the professionals. They were hustled through the crowd, past the smirking guests, and thrown out the same double doors Sarah had exited earlier. But they weren't thrown into a waiting car. David and Jessica landed on the wet pavement of the driveway. The rain was still pouring. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Inside, the warmth returned. Silas put his arm around Sarah. "You did well, Starling." "I don't feel good, grandfather," Sarah admitted, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I feel empty." "That is the price of removing a tumor," Silas said gently. "It hurts before it heals. But now we have work to do. We have to ensure he stays down." "He's finished, isn't he?" Sarah asked. Silas smiled, a wolfish grin. "Oh no, my dear. He's just broke. Breaking him? That's what we do tomorrow." The sun rose over Seattle, but it brought no warmth to room 114 of the Blue Horizon Motel, a dilapidated roadside establishment off the I-5 highway. The neon sign outside flickered with a persistent, maddening buzz that had kept David Jenkins awake for the few hours he had attempted to sleep. David sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the stained beige carpet. He was still wearing his tuxedo from the night before, though now it was wrinkled, damp, and missing a button. His dress shoes were caked with mud from the long walk down the Fairmont Estates driveway before an Uber finally accepted his ride request, paid for with the last $50 on a hidden emergency credit card he kept in his phone case. Beside him, Jessica Vane was pacing the small room, the crimson gown that had looked so glamorous under the chandeliers now looking garish and absurd in the harsh daylight. She was frantically tapping on her phone. "This is a disaster, David. An absolute disaster," Jessica hissed, stopping to glare at him. "Do you know what's trending on Twitter? Do you want to hear the hashtags?" David rubbed his temples, a pounding headache splitting his skull. "Stop it, Jessica. I'm thinking." "You're not thinking. You're sitting there like a stunned mullet," she screamed. "Listen to this. David Jenkins. Izova has 40,000 tweets. Nanas Team Sarah has 200,000. There's a video of you being dragged out by the neck. It has 4 million views in 6 hours. She shoved the phone in his face. David recoiled. On the screen, a shaky cell phone video showed him screaming about his laptop, while Caney, the stone-faced bodyguard, marched him into the rain. The comments were brutal. User 123. Imagine fumbling a billionaire heiress for a marketing rep. L of the century. Tech guru. Jenkins' tech stock is going to zero. Puts on JNK. Sarah's fan. The way she walked away, though. Queen behavior. David slapped the phone away. It doesn't matter. The internet has a short memory. By next week, they'll be outraged about something else. We just need to stabilize the company. I still own the majority of the voting shares. I'm the CEO. Silas Sterling can take the house. He can take the car, but he can't take my brain. Jenkins Tech is me. Jessica let out a cold, incredulous laugh. She walked over to the small mirror above the dresser and began aggressively wiping off her smeared mascara. "You really don't get it, do you?" she said, looking at his reflection. "You think I stuck around because I liked your brain? I stuck around because you were a winner. You were the golden boy." David stood up, his face darkening. "And I still am. We're going to the office. I'll call an emergency board meeting. I'll explain that this is a hostile takeover attempt by the Sterling Group. The board will side with me. They know I'm the visionary." "The board?" Jessica turned around, her eyes narrowing. "David, who do you think sits on the board? Investors, people who care about money. You just cost them millions in a single night. You're radioactive." "I made them rich," David shouted. "And you, I made you VP. We are a team, Jessica. We're the power couple, remember?" Jessica looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached for her purse. She pulled out a pack of cigarettes, something David hated, and lit one. "We were a power couple when you had power," she said, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "Now, you're a guy in a dirty tuxedo in a $40 motel room, and I have a career to salvage." She walked to the door and opened it. The noise of the highway flooded the room. "Where are you going?" David asked, panic suddenly seizing his chest. "I'm going to call a lawyer," Jessica said calmly. "To sue you for sexual harassment." David's jaw dropped. "What?" "Jessica, we've been sleeping together for 6 months. You pushed for this. And I can prove that as my boss you coerced me." She lied smoothly, her face a mask of calculation. "If I spin the narrative that I was a victim of your manipulation just like Sarah, maybe, just maybe, Silas Sterling won't destroy me too. I need to distance myself from the sinking ship, David. And you are the Titanic." "You can't do this," David whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than the cold rain. "I left my wife for you." Jessica smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That was your first mistake. Never leave the money, David. Everyone knows that." She stepped out, the door clicking shut behind her. David stood alone in the silence. He looked at the empty room. He felt a scream building in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He wasn't done. He refused to be done. "I built it," he muttered to the empty room, his eyes manic. "I built it all, and I'm going to take it back." He went into the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and tried to smooth his hair. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked haggard, desperate. He adjusted his tie. It was crooked, but it would have to do. "Showtime," he whispered. He grabbed his phone and walked out of the motel. He didn't have a car, so he began to walk. It was 3 miles to the headquarters of Jenkins Tech. He would walk every step, and with every step, his hatred for Sarah grew. She had humiliated him. She had turned his life upside down. He would make her pay. He would burn the company to the ground before he let her have it. The headquarters of Jenkins Tech was a marvel of modern architecture, a sleek, twisting tower of glass and steel in downtown Seattle. It was designed to look like a shard of crystal piercing the sky. David had commissioned it himself, calling it the Spire of Innovation. Today, as David approached the building after an hour of walking, sweating in the morning humidity. It looked less like a monument and more like a fortress he was trying to siege. There were news vans parked out front. CNN, Fox, CNBC. Reporters were milling about the plaza, microphones in hand. David pulled his jacket collar up and tried to slip in through the side entrance, the one reserved for executives. He tapped his keycard against the reader. Beep, beep, beep. Red light. Access denied. David frowned. He tapped it again. Harder. Beep, beep, beep. Access denied. Is there a problem, Mr. Jenkins? David spun around. Standing there was Marcus, the head of building security. Marcus was a former Marine who David had personally hired. They usually exchanged fist bumps. Today, Marcus stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable behind dark sunglasses. My card isn't working, Marcus, David said, trying to project authority. Let me in. I have a board meeting to convene. I can't do that, sir, Marcus said. I have strict orders. Orders from whom? David snapped. I am the CEO. I give the orders. Orders from the new acting chairperson, Marcus replied. Acting chairperson? David laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. We don't have a chairperson. The seat is empty. Not anymore. They're waiting for you in the boardroom, sir. But you are to be escorted. You are not allowed to roam the floors. Fine, David spat. Take me to them. I'll fire the lot of them. Marcus gestured to the door, opening it manually. 2 other guards fell in step behind David. It wasn't an escort, it was a prisoner transfer. They walked through the lobby. Usually, the lobby of Jenkins Tech was a hive of activity. Coders drinking coffee, marketing teams brainstorming. Today, it was silent. As David walked past, people stopped. They stared. There were no smiles, no "Good morning, boss," just judgment. He saw a few employees quickly close browser windows that likely contained the video of his humiliation. They reached the elevator. Marcus pressed the button for the top floor. The ride up was silent, the pressure building in David's ears. The elevator doors opened directly into the boardroom. It was a massive room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. A long mahogany table dominated the space. David stormed out of the elevator, ready to scream. Who do you think you... He stopped. Sitting at the head of the table wasn't Silas Sterling. It wasn't one of the venture capitalists. It was Sarah. She was wearing a white power suit, sharp and tailored, a stark contrast to the vintage dress she had worn the night before. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She looked every inch the corporate titan. To her right sat Silas Sterling, looking bored, flipping through a file. To her left sat Jonathan Price and the other 4 members of the board. They were all looking at Sarah. "You're late, David," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, devoid of the trembling softness he was used to. It was the voice of a woman who held all the cards. "Get out of my chair," David snarled, marching toward her. "Sit down, David," Silas said, without looking up, "or Caney will sit you down." David looked to the corner. Caney was there, leaning against the wall, cleaning his fingernails with a small knife. David swallowed and took the empty seat at the far end of the table, the seat usually reserved for junior executives. "This is illegal," David said, gripping the armrests. "You can't just take over. I own 51% of the voting stock." "Owned," Jonathan Price corrected him. Past tense. "What are you talking about?" Sarah slid a folder across the long table. It stopped perfectly in front of David. "Open it," she said. David opened the folder. It was a legal document, a change of control provision. "Section 4, Clause B of your incorporation charter," Sarah recited from memory. "In the event that the CEO creates material reputational damage that results in a stock devaluation of more than 30% in a 24-hour period, The board has the right to trigger a margin call on executive shares if those shares were used as collateral for personal loans. David froze. He knew the clause. He had written it to protect himself from other executives messing up. He never thought it would be used against him. You leveraged your stock to buy the Fairmont estate, David, Sarah continued. And the yacht, and the sports cars. When grandfather called in the loan on the house, it triggered a chain reaction. The banks got scared. They called in everything. To cover your debts, your shares were automatically liquidated at 9 a.m. this morning. And guess who bought them? Silas chuckled. At a lovely discount, I might add. David felt the room spinning. So, I have nothing? You have about $12,000 in a checking account, I believe, Sarah said coldly. But as for the company, no. You own nothing. But I'm still the founder, David pleaded, his voice breaking. I wrote the code, the core algorithm, the nexus. That's mine. You can't run this company without me. I'm the only one who understands how it works. This was his ace in the hole. The code was complex. It was his genius. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time, a small, sad smile touched her lips. Do you really believe that, David? Of course I do. I spent nights coding that while you were painting your stupid pictures. Sarah stood up. She walked slowly down the length of the table. Do you remember 4 years ago? The blackout crisis? When the code crashed and the entire system was offline for 3 days? You were panicking. You were throwing things. You couldn't find the syntax error. David blinked. He remembered. It was the most stressful week of his life. Then, miraculously, he had woken up one morning, and the code was fixed. He had assumed he fixed it in a sleep-deprived fugue state. He had taken credit for it. I fixed it, Sarah said softly. David stared at her. You? You don't know Python. You don't know C++. I have a master's in computer science from MIT, David, Sarah revealed. I got it before I met you. I never told you because you never asked. You were so busy talking about yourself. You never asked me a single question about my education, the board members murmured. Jonathan Price looked impressed. I fixed the kernel, Sarah continued. I optimized the data flow. And every night since then, when you were asleep or out, networking with Jessica, I've been patching your sloppy work. The Nexus isn't yours, David. It's ours. And mostly, it's mine. David slumped back in his chair. He was stripped bare. His money, his house, his lover, and now his intellect. All of it was a lie he had told himself. So what happens now? David whispered. Now, Sarah said, returning to the head of the table. We vote. She looked at the board members. Motion to terminate David Jenkins as CEO for cause, effective immediately, and to bar him from the premises. Seconded, Jonathan Price said instantly. All in favor? Every hand went up, even the board members David thought were his friends. Motion carries, Sarah said. She looked at David. You're fired. David didn't move. He couldn't. Marcus, Sarah said into the intercom, please escort Mr. Jenkins out and give him a box for his personal effects. Small box. He won't be taking any electronics. Marcus stepped forward. Let's go, David. David stood up. He felt lightheaded. He looked at Sarah one last time. She wasn't looking at him with hate. She was looking at him with indifference. That was worse. Sarah, he choked out. Goodbye, David, she said, turning her attention to the documents in front of her. We have a company to rebuild. David let Marcus lead him out. He walked back through the office. This time, the employees didn't just stare. They watched him leave with a sense of relief. The tyrant was gone. He reached the front doors, the glass fortress he had built. Marcus pushed the doors open. The reporters were waiting. They saw him. David. David. Is it true you've been ousted? David, what do you have to say to your wife? David, are you bankrupt? The flashes of the cameras blinded him. He stumbled out onto the sidewalk, clutching a small cardboard box that contained a stapler, a stress ball, and a framed photo of himself. He looked up at the sky. It was still raining. He was back where he started. But this time he had nowhere to go. And high above, on the 50th floor, Sarah Sterling stood at the window, watching the small figure disappear into the sea of reporters. "Are you okay?" Silas asked, coming up beside her. Sarah placed her hand on the cool glass. "I will be," she said. "I finally feel awake." Silas nodded. "Good. Because the real work starts now. Being a Sterling isn't about taking power, Sarah. It's about keeping it." Sarah turned from the window. Her eyes were sharp, her posture strong. The vintage dress was gone. The shy wife was gone. "I'm ready, grandfather," she said. "Let's get to work." 6 months had passed since the storm at the Fairmont estate. In the world of high finance and tech, 6 months is a lifetime. It is enough time for empires to rise, for stocks to crash, and for names to be forgotten. Seattle had moved on. The city was currently buzzing about the upcoming Future Summit, a global conference hosted by the newly rebranded Sterling Tech. The company, formerly Jenkins Tech, had undergone a metamorphosis. Under the leadership of Sarah Sterling, it had shifted focus from aggressive data mining to ethical AI solutions for healthcare and education. The stock price hadn't just recovered, it had tripled. Sarah sat in her office, the same office that had once belonged to David. The decor was different now. The cold chrome and black leather were gone, replaced by warm oak, soft lighting, and the vibrant paintings she had once been forced to hide. She was reviewing the guest list for the summit when her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Sterling," her assistant's voice chimed. "Your grandfather is here." "Send him in." Silas Sterling walked in, looking healthier than he had in years. He wasn't leaning as heavily on his cane. Retiring from the daily grind to let Sarah take the reins had given him a new lease on life. "Grandfather?" Sarah smiled, standing to embrace him. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Checking up on my Q3 projections?" "I saw the projections," Silas chuckled, sinking into a chair. "They are impeccable. You have a steady hand, Sarah. Much steadier than mine ever was. No, I came to give you this." He slid a small sealed envelope across the desk. It was marked "Confidential. Private investigations." Sarah hesitated. "Is this about him?" "It is," Silas nodded. "You asked me to keep tabs, just to ensure he didn't try anything foolish." "The report is final. He is no longer a threat." Sarah picked up the envelope. She hadn't seen or spoken to David since the day he was escorted out of the building with his box of trinkets. She had divorced him in absentia, the legal proceedings handled entirely by Silas's sharks. David hadn't even shown up to court. He couldn't afford a lawyer to contest the terms. "Do you want to know?" Silas asked softly. Sarah looked at the envelope. She thought about the man she had loved. She thought about the cruelty in his eyes on their anniversary. And then she thought about the peace she had found in the last 6 months. She slid the envelope back to Silas. "No," she said. "I don't need to know. He's in the past, and I have a summit to run." Silas smiled, a look of immense pride crossing his face. He took the envelope and slipped it into his pocket. "That is the correct answer," he said. "The opposite of love isn't hate, Sarah. It's indifference. You finally won. 5 miles away, in a strip mall that had seen better days, The fluorescent lights of Gadget Fix hummed with an annoying, high-pitched whine. The store smelled of burnt solder and floor cleaner. "Hey, buddy, I'm talking to you." David Jenkins looked up from the shattered iPhone screen he was trying to pry open. He adjusted his blue polo shirt, which was a size too small, and had a name tag that read "Trainee" pinned crookedly to the chest. "I'm sorry, sir," David said, his voice flat and weary. "As I explained, the water damage is extensive. The motherboard is fried. I can't recover the photos." The customer, a large man with a red face, slammed his fist on the counter. "You people are useless. Do you know who I am? I run a landscaping business. I have important client data on there." "I understand," David said, fighting the urge to roll his eyes. "Do you know who I am?" he thought. "I used to run a billion-dollar company. I used to drink scotch that cost more than your truck." But he didn't say it. He couldn't. "I can try an isopropyl bath," David offered meekly, "but it will cost extra." "Just do it," the man barked, storming off to browse the cheap phone cases. David sighed and went back to work. His hands, once manicured and soft, were now calloused and stained with grease. He lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat. He took the bus to work. His friends had blocked his number. Jessica Vane had moved to Los Angeles the week after the firing, trying to become a lifestyle coach. He heard she was currently being sued for selling counterfeit handbags. It was a long, hard fall. David finished the repair and wiped his hands on a rag. He looked up at the TV mounted in the corner of the shop, which usually played a loop of commercials. Today, however, it was tuned to the local news. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "We are live from the Sterling Tech Future Summit." David froze. On the screen, Sarah walked onto a massive stage. She looked radiant. She wore a deep emerald suit that commanded authority. Thousands of people were applauding, not out of polite obligation, but out of genuine respect. "Thank you," Sarah's voice came through the tinny speakers of the TV. Technology is often seen as a cold tool, but at Sterling Tech, we believe it should have a heartbeat. We believe in building systems that support people, not replace them. The camera panned to the front row. Silas Sterling was there, wiping a tear from his eye. David stared at the screen. He saw the way she held the microphone. He saw the confidence in her posture. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that she had always had that strength. He had just spent 5 years trying to bury it because it intimidated him. He had thrown away a diamond because he wanted to hold a piece of broken glass. "Hey, trainee!" his manager shouted from the back office. "Stop watching TV and clean the counters. We have a rush coming in." David looked at Sarah one last time on the screen. She was smiling, a real, genuine smile he hadn't seen in years. He looked down at his name tag. "Trainee." "Coming," David whispered. He grabbed the spray bottle and the rag. He sprayed the counter and began to wipe, erasing the smudges, erasing the dirt, erasing himself. Outside, the rain began to fall on Seattle, washing the streets clean, ready for a new day. This story isn't just a drama about billionaires and revenge. It's a mirror held up to the way we value the people in our lives. David made the fatal mistake of confusing value with volume. He thought that because Sarah was quiet, she was weak. He thought that because Jessica was loud, she was strong. He chased the shiny, superficial validation of status and discarded the genuine, foundational support of love. In the end, Sarah didn't destroy David. She simply removed her support, and he collapsed under the weight of his own ego. It serves as a powerful reminder. Be careful who you step on while climbing to the ladder, because they might be the only ones holding it up. Real power doesn't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes it just needs to make a phone call. And that is the story of how Sarah Sterling turned her greatest humiliation into her greatest victory. Now, I have a question for you guys. If you were Sarah and David came back 6 months later, begging for forgiveness, claiming he had changed, would you have given him a second chance? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We upload brand new dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, never mistake silence for weakness. See you in the next video.